Welcome to Girl on the Gov, the podcast, breaking down politics as we know it and removing all the bullshit.
Because politics needed a rebrand.
Okay, welcome back to Girl on the Gov, the podcast. Welcome back to YouTube. Welcome back to video episodes. We have a very special, unique episode for everybody today. We're switching it up structure-wise for this week. So much to talk about today. We do most of that talking in these interviews. We have 2 interviews on the docket for this episode, and we are talking more about reproductive rights and the fight for them. And we're having 2 different perspectives on the show. 2 candidates, one current representative and one who was a former local representative. So we got all the experience. But yeah, one in a blue state, a very blue state, California, and one in a very, very red state, Louisiana, who is fighting a bill that essentially makes birth control and abortion homicide, making Sam and I both serial killers.
Which, hey, look, I always thought for us it was going to be white collar crime by total accident.
Tax fraud.
But like, you know, this one takes us a whole different route. But regardless, absolutely horrifying, this entire bill. So in our conversation, we go through what's included, what it means. Also, like, is this going to be something that gets pushed in other states as well, especially red states? You know, what is this going to do for the future of reproductive rights and access in other southern states and across the country? But I think this conversation, this dual conversation, is really cool to see. I know, like, we did these interviews and we were like, whoa, like the contrast, guys,
the contrast. And to put them next to each other, I think is going to be really interesting. And I hope you guys all find it, I'm not going to say interesting again, but interesting.
Intriguing.
Intriguing. I don't know. Mind-blowing. Absolutely. But yeah, definitely hang around. We're going to talk to Emily Beach, who is a candidate in California first, and then we will head into our interview with Mandie Landry, who we've had on the show before, who is amazing and is just an absolute hero. And just talking to her was seriously mind-blowing. So definitely hang around to hear all of that at the end. But before we get into those interviews, there are, well, two stories really to talk about, because we won't be doing top stories at the end of the show, but we definitely want to talk about the 2 shootings that happened the past few days and how horrifying they are, and also some action items, because we can't just keep, thoughts and prayers in this stuff, and there are things to do. So we want to highlight the story and highlight how people can help and have some impact.
And before we do that, before we get into like some action items, which are going to take 2 different forms, we are having an episode on gun reform. The timing could not be more immaculate. Yeah. Anyways, we are recording that later this week. So if you guys are listening in time, send us your questions, DM us, email us at info@girlonthegov.com. We would love to include more and more audience questions. So
comment on YouTube.
Have a question? Send it. Oh, yeah. Comment on YouTube.
Comment on YouTube. Wow. You guys, if you do comment on YouTube, it's seriously a really easy way for us to, like, while you're watching or listening to these episodes, to send your comments in, like, in live time while you're listening. You won't forget. It's right there. So just another reminder to go subscribe on YouTube. Also, go watch an episode on YouTube, see how you like it. Let us know what you think and other video content you want to see from us. I was gonna try and start to, like, look cuter for some of these recordings, and here I am, like, back in my just hoodie sweat set.
She's a California girl. She's, like, so surfer, so chill.
Well, and then Sam's over here giving just full Carrie Bradshaw, like, while I'm over here in my sweats that I woke up in.
I don't have eyeliner on today.
Oh, wow.
I pulled it back.
I curled my eyelashes, put sunscreen on, and have a little bit of lip gloss on, just to, make me look alive. But yeah, I'm giving off an Alex Cooper vibe, just full sweatsuit. I think every recording, I think that might be my vibe. And it's so funny, just total tangent. She is having Christine Quinn from Selling Sunset on the show this week. And Christine Quinn is wearing, like, head to toe, like, matrix latex Balenciaga outfit, and like I just hope that Alex is sitting across from her in like a full Color Daddy merch sweat set, and I just think that would be the funniest thing ever. I don't know what
the
her
odds
outfit's
are
gonna be.
ever in her favor of that. Like, it's just, it was so funny too because she had a story that was like, guess who like the guest is, and it was such a Kardashian outfit. Like, it was such a
Oh my
Kim
God,
outfit.
I was like, did
and I was
Kim
like,
cut her hair?
I don't right, and like
I thought it was
like,
Kim.
it doesn't feel quite right. Like,
Because
I knew
she's
it
blonde right now
wouldn't
too.
be. Oh my God, you're so right.
But her hair is like long
Wow.
blonde, so I was like, maybe she got like a haircut but has the blonde still. It was totally a Kim outfit with the gloves and the Balenciaga.
The thing is, I feel like I'm gonna have to save this, like, that episode to listen to, because I haven't been watching this season of Selling Sunset because I don't have Netflix right now, because I go
It's
back
so
and forth between
bad.
canceling it and then like getting it. Like, if there's like a bunch of shows I want to watch, I'll resubscribe, and then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I've seen what I've needed to see.
I keep like turning it
So, yeah.
on and I'll watch an episode and I'm like, oh my God, I hate this show. And I genuinely don't think I like a single character on the show. Like I just can't. Like, I hate it. But like, I watched maybe 4 episodes last night. Like, I don't know why I want to watch the reunion really bad. And so I was like, fine, I'll finish the season or I'll try. But I just hate it. I don't know why I'm doing this to myself. But anyways.
But like, did you watch the Summer House reunion? That's the real question.
Oh, not
Okay.
not part 2. So
Okay. Lips sealed. Yep. Lips are sealed.
it's just I don't think it
so
comes
many
onto
thoughts and
my
feels
streaming
about it.
I don't think it comes onto my
Do
streaming
you have
platform
Peacock?
until the next day. I have Peacock, I have the Bravo app, and I have Hulu. So I kind of go
Oh,
back and
Hulu.
forth
It's
in
on
and out.
Hulu. It's on Hulu. You're good.
I know, and then my Hulu hasn't been working lately with Summer House, so I don't know. But nonetheless,
We got issues.
we got issues. But let's get into this story. So we'll start with the California shooting that happened because a man opened fire during a lunch reception at a Southern California church on Sunday, killing 1 person and wounding 5 senior citizens. But this church was majority Taiwanese people, and this man came in and they're maybe speculating that it was also a hate crime. But moving to Buffalo, where
Speaking of hate crimes,
speaking of major hate crimes
terrorism.
and terrorism, yeah, Peyton Gendron, don't even know if that's how you pronounce his name, but I don't give a fuck. 18-year-old accused of killing 10 people at a supermarket in Buffalo on Saturday, wrote in increasing detail of his plans to murder dozens of Black people in statements posted online over the past 5 months, according to a compilation of messages by a writer who identified himself as this shooter. Why is his name even in here, you know? But so the Washington Post found 600 pages of messages that he basically was talking about killing those that he slurred as replacers, and decided in February to target Buffalo's top grocery store based on its local African American population. So this was a targeted shooting. He drove 200 miles to this town, this grocery store, to specifically shoot Black people. He is a known white supremacist. Again, there's twofold to this. It's really, again, a gun issue, but it's also a racism issue, a terrorism issue, and a pure hate crime issue. So we do have some action items. Again, like Sam said, we'll be covering gun reform stuff this week when we record, but we are here to provide some action items. Sam will run through some like anti-hate stuff, but also just make sure you're following, every town and other organizations that work towards gun reform. They have tons of amazing resources on their website and on their social media. They have scripts, they have emails for how you can call your representatives, because that's a huge action item when you look for gun reform. Call those reps, because what is it? I think like 70% of Republicans and like 90 something of Democrats in this country support closing loopholes and other forms of gun reform, and it's not happening because we have many of our reps in a chokehold by the gun lobby. Samantha, why don't you run us through some more action items that we can look to in this dark time?
So lightly touched on this, but this domestic terrorism attack is directly correlated to the Great Replacement theory, which is something that has been spewed by Fox News, specifically Tucker Carlson, over and over again. It is one of the many factors that has contributed to growing levels and percentages of hate crimes, growth of hate groups within the US. Now, if you're sitting here and you're like, okay, well, what are these hate groups? How do I find them? Are there certain areas where this is growing more than others? How do I get an understanding or a pulse for what is the target here and what's going on? There are two really good organizations that track this data and have really great resources for understanding where this is all happening. The first with the Southern Poverty Law Center. So they track hate crimes across the US. They have a really, really interesting hate map. That sounds so bad because it is so bad. But on the map, you can look by ideology, you can look by geography, you can get an understanding of where stuff is popping up. And then you can also, when you're clicking on the map, you see the categorization of what type of hate group or hate organization exists in a particular area. You can click on and get an understanding of like what their ideology is. So good way to get an understanding of what those groups are. The ADL, Anti-Defamation League, also has what's called a heat map. So that's looking more specifically at the hate crimes committed. Similarly, you can look by ideology, by geography, timeline, etc. They also have a part on their website where if you experience a hate crime, witness a hate crime, etc., where you can report it. Even if you don't want to go to the police, you can still report it, and it's really good to help provide them data. That data is then provided to legislatures that can then make laws based on that. So just keep that in mind. I will also say that there is another podcast that people should listen to.
We love another podcast.
I know, a good podcast track. I'm smiling because I love a good podcast, not because of what the topic is. So just like
a podcast that supports other podcasts.
That is a fact. That is definitely a fact. But speaking of the Southern Poverty Law Center, they do have a podcast, and they have episodes that go through sort of the evolution of hate, how it grows, what spurs it, what it sort of latches onto, where it happens, the communities that are totally grappling with this at the very forefront. Highly recommend taking a listen to that podcast and also looking at these heat maps. It'll give you a really great idea of how intense this is. And when I mean intense, I don't mean obviously this is violence, it's intense, but I mean how rapidly this problem is evolving and growing, because this has always been an issue, but it's only getting worse. Thanks Tucker Carlson and your cronies. Not the only one to blame, but definitely one at the very source. I would say also an action item to consider, and this goes across any political issue, is corporate boycotts. So look at who is funding Fox News, since they are a huge culprit. But Nutrisystem, top of the list,
of course. Like any like pyramid scheme, like bullshit, like weight loss workout situation,
bad diet culture,
like 100%. But yeah, this story is it's so devastating.
Vile.
And I also like love the point and argument of like, this is why we need critical race theory, and we need anti-racism teaching in our schools, because this boy is an 18-year-old who is on the internet, you know, listening to white supremacists and all their hateful rhetoric, and you know, there are ways to prevent these things, and education is one piece. So whoever says we don't need it is full of fucking shit, and this story is the perfect example of why. So anyways, moving into these interviews and into our episode, we will introduce our guests, but since we won't be like saying a farewell after the interview, let's just, you know, give everybody our quick little housekeeping moments before we dive in, because please go subscribe on YouTube. Go watch us on YouTube here and there, you know. And again, comment any questions you have and share content from us. This is an election year. There's so many ways to have impact, and one of them is to share political learning resources, us being one of them. But we also on our social media share a lot of other amazing resources, be it political learning resources, action items, and more. So go follow us, go share our content, share all of our stuff, and have some impact yourself. Join our brand ambassador program. There's no requirements, and you can go learn about the program at growinthegov.com. What else? Subscribe, rate, review. I don't know. Yeah. But
we might have to also start reading some of our bad reviews, because they're kind of hilarious.
Oh, our first YouTube comment was stop killing your babies or something. Stop murdering your babies. That's our only YouTube comment right now, you guys. So if you can go head on over to YouTube and add some more positive ones.
Support your girls.
Fantastic. Yeah. But no, we definitely will be doing a bad review segment at some point because there are some doozies, let me tell you.
So first up, we have Emily Beach. She's a congressional candidate in California. So we cannot wait for you guys to listen in, hear her thoughts on the Roe v. Wade situation, and also, of course, learn about her campaign. Second to that, and we love both of these amazing women, Mandie Landry, who is a state representative in Louisiana. She is fighting the good fight, as they say, in Louisiana, trying to protect reproductive rights. Anyways, in this fight, she is also now running for Louisiana State Senate. If she wins, fingers crossed, she will be the only pro-choice woman in the Louisiana State Senate. That is beyond a boggling fact to me. But without further ado, let's get the fuck into it. So, here is Emily, followed by Mandie.
Yay!
All right, well, we cannot wait to get into it because we have a congressional campaign to talk about. And before we get into your district and why, you're running and everything, I want to know a little bit about your political journey, because this is not the first office you've got eyes on or have been in. Tell us how you got here. Give us the lay of the land.
Thanks, Sammy. No, I've been in local government actually for the past 7 years as a mayor and a city council member in my city of Burlingame, California. And prior, yeah, exactly. And prior to that, my journey was kind of an interesting one. It was a winding road, but I was a community volunteer, just engaging and volunteering in my kids' schools, running what we call our education foundation out here in Burlingame. Unfortunately, in California, public schools aren't funded the way they need to be to have kind of basic programs like arts, music, PE teachers, library services, right? A lot of that has to be privately funded, which is really unfortunate. So I was just a community volunteer, and I got very involved as our community was growing and we were getting ready to reimagine how our city through a general plan process was going to grow over the next 20 years. And that really interested me. So I threw my hat in the ring for that seat. But prior to being in Burlingame, I had spent some time in the United States Army. I was an Army officer coming out of college. I worked in the private sector in Silicon Valley for a few years. So I have some business background, and I just brought all these different tools in the toolbox, which have they've really helped me, I think, be a better kind of an elected official with a broad view. So that's how I ended up here. And then we've got a congressional race right now.
Yeah, let's talk about
it.
Sure
do.
let's talk about it, because what made you decide to run for Congress specifically? Let's run through that. And also, can you kind of give us a little snapshot of your platform and really the issues you're looking to tackle?
Sure. Well, we've had an amazing Congresswoman for many years here, Congresswoman Jackie Spear, who's been such a leader on women's rights, women's issues, you name it, women's equity, pay equity, gender equity, really a champion for women. And, I also really respect her work in trying to combat sexual harassment and assault in the military, having been an Army veteran myself. So she's been a hero of mine. She's retiring after many years of service. An open congressional seat in a blue district. That doesn't happen very often. So we've got a very competitive race. And, I threw my hat in the ring because this is not the time for particularly women who have something to offer in elected life to sit back down and behave when there's an opportunity to lead. There are so many issues affecting women, our economic power, certainly now our bodies. I've been talking about this for 6 months. I've been concerned since we launched the campaign on December 1st. But there's so many other issues that are front and center to our families that we see on the front lines as moms. I'm a mom of teenagers. My daughter is almost 18 years old. My son is 15. Certainly, I'm putting a lot of issues that are informed by my experience, including education, reproductive freedom, mental health. These are key issues in my race. I'm also talking about climate action and housing and homelessness. So those are my big five. But you can tell by the things I'm prioritizing, it's because I've lived and I care deeply about these issues.
Well, we definitely know that because we know you have a Vote Mama endorsement on your page. So we love it. We love Vote Mama. So absolutely love the perspective and what you can obviously bring to this race. And speaking of this race and everything that's going on, especially with women's rights, big shout out to SCOTUS for that one. Got to love it, aka not at all. As someone that's really been a part of the political scene at this point? You've been mayor, you've been on city council. Can you give us an idea of what it looks like to consider abortion rights at a local level? Like, how do those things intersect? And is there any way to also protect them at that local level?
No, it is a great question. Let me just give a quick shout out to Vote Mama too. They're doing such important work to get more, not just women, but moms. What do they have a statistic? I think it's like 6% of Congress are moms with kids that are school age. That is such an important perspective to have. And we need more of us there on the front lines fighting for these things we care about, right? Whether it's paid parental leave, education, you name it, early learning. Okay. So back to the local level, there's a lot that happens at the local level. First of all, at least in California, we've got cities have a lot of responsibility for land use. So we set the responsibility for what things can be zoned where, what businesses can go where. There's a component there. And then the other local government entity, right, in here is the county really deals with health services. And so making sure that clinics and that there's access to reproductive services, whether it's birth control or abortion services. But I think the other thing that, as I look across the country, local jurisdictions have a responsibility, even in terms of, let's say, protests that happen outside of abortion clinics. Okay, we have First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, but there have to be protections too for the police to come and make sure that women have access, and folks who are going into those clinics to get the services they need aren't being, encumbered unfairly. And so there's a local component there. But I think those are some of the big things. But of course, if cities and counties are restricted by what's happening at the state level, like what we're looking at right now, where potentially all these all these states that are ready to just basically ban abortion when the Supreme Court decision comes out. I've heard scary things, right? It could be half the states in the United States of America fall where abortion is basically illegal. That, cities and counties can't do anything about that. Those issues. That's where the federal government has to step in. And that's why we need more women in the room in Congress to make sure we codify Roe v. Wade into law so that we protect women's reproductive freedom from here forward and we get it out of the courts.
Yes, and that was a perfect segue because we want to talk about your plans when you do get to Congress, how you plan to really protect women's rights at that level and how to do so. I mean, we're going to dive into this topic even more about what that even means to, codify the law and all those things. But can you kind of tell us like your plan of really when you get there, how you plan to kind of tackle this issue?
Well, fortunately, the majority of, we've got a Democratic majority that's working on this in the House of Representatives right now, but of course it's being stalled in the Senate. No big surprise, right? With the filibuster. And so, I mean, we have to persist. Great legislation doesn't always happen. It takes time, but this is now urgent. Right. This is now because now the Supreme Court looks like it's speaking. And if it restricts women's access to abortion services, we're in a world of hurt. And so Congress needs to react quickly. I am optimistic. I mean, I'm an optimist. That's why I'm running. I want to actually be at the table to help fix the existential challenges that we're facing, whether it's climate action, right? Or whether it's solving this issue of reproductive freedom. But there's a lot of states that are going to be, swing states are up for grabs. There is an opportunity in this election for women across the country to step up and vote blue and get more Democrats elected so that we can actually get to that level, that threshold, while we have a Democratic president to pass this legislation. But we have to keep the Democratic caucus together. We have to keep moderate Democrats that may be getting high pressure, not in states like California. We are pro-choice 110%, but there's a lot of other states that are sort of, in the middle. And that's where we need people who can really speak to the other side. And we need women at the table talking about this. Choice is not just about, I love abortion. It's about empowering and trusting women and their doctors and their conscience to make these decisions for themselves, not imposing federal law and state law to prevent them from making those decisions about their own personal futures. So it's about choice. Yeah, and that's where we need women to negotiate that. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons I think I'd be a particularly valuable member of the team. Look, I identify as Catholic. I grew up Catholic. I attended the University of Notre Dame, same university that Justice Barrett attended, right? I understand folks on the other side, but I am staunchly pro-choice. And we need women like me at the table helping negotiate and bring this through. I'm going to be a very effective member of the team to help ensure these rights.
Totally.
And I think being able to speak another language in a sense is really, really important.
Yeah.
Like Maddie and I could talk about all day how like neither of us are religious at all and like didn't grow up that way and have our own sort of opinions on it. But then, when we hear religious arguments, we're like, well, we can't really participate in the best way because, despite us having our own opinions, we don't speak the language. So whatever we say is not going to translate and vice versa. So to have someone that can translate and to actually make some movement, I think that's wonderful and definitely something that's very needed. But stepping back to that fateful day last Monday when this little opinion was leaked. Still very curious who did it, but that's a story for another time.
Yeah, Mitch McConnell says that's the real story.
I can't. I mean, gobble wobble is all I can say on that one. But without me doing any more name calling, what was like your reaction? How did you feel about it?
Just gut punch. And honestly, though, I've been following this because I'm a political nerd. You guys are too. It's not like I didn't see this coming. It was just like the worst nightmare. And then to read the opinion and to see the justification of it, that is just so tone deaf to the experience of women in this country. I don't know if you saw that op-ed in the Washington Post this weekend that was just spot on, talking about, the view that Alito has and the reality of what it is to be pregnant in America, to be a woman. And even when it's a welcome pregnancy, even when you have a partner and you have economic resources to navigate that space, it's still hard. It's still hard to keep your career going and everything like this. And then you put all those other burdens for people who don't have those advantages or are struggling in a number of other ways. And it's worse for women of color and poor women. It was just remarkable. I think the other thing that really just stuck a knife in me, because I'm a process person, and I believe so deeply in our institutions that, I was born in 1974. And Roe v. Wade, right? I'm about, a year difference from Roe v. Wade. For as long as I've been alive, we've had legal precedent that was reaffirmed with Casey, right? Versus Planned Parenthood. It's legal precedent that women have the right to make these own choices for themselves, that this court is taking nearly 50 years of legal precedent, turning it on its head for really political purposes. It just is mind-blowing and very disturbing to the core about how we could possibly go back 50 years where women didn't have access. I know women who are older who had to go south of the border for a procedure and it devastated. I've heard these stories, and to the thought, I'm sorry, I'm rambling right now, but I'm apoplectic about it, that my daughter, who's nearly 18, and her generation of women have basically will have less reproductive freedom than her grandmother did. There's something wrong with that. Our Constitution is not in the business of trampling on human rights. And that's exactly what's happening right now. We're going backwards. And so it's just absolutely a gut punch.
Gut punch is the perfect way to articulate it. But moving even deeper into this conversation and just kind of what's been coming up after the fact, after the leak. We've heard from both sides, but actually Mitch McConnell recently stated that the Republicans will take up legislation banning abortion at the national level if they were to win back the majority. Can you kind of shed light of what's at stake here and like how could they do that and really run us through that potential reality that can come somewhat soon?
It's a real reality, and I think the biggest danger is that Mitch McConnell has proven his willingness to change the rules whenever it's convenient for him. So that filibuster is going to disappear.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Dialed back the filibuster to get the judges he wanted in. When it comes to something as high stakes as reproductive freedom, now that they have a window of opportunity, I think the biggest danger is not so much there's obviously a danger in 22 if they, and history tells us, right, the pendulum swings back and forth. So we can expect, I don't want to see it, but we can expect probably there's a good chance that Republicans could take back the House. Although I think this is a game changer because I think women are going to show up at the polls, right?
That's what they don't always get, that like their bigotry fires people up and, they don't always account for that, which I think is something to definitely note, that it was looking bad for Democrats really for the last 2 years, but
this may just be the thing that fires them up. But I think where I worry the most, and I hope that we maintain a Democratic president. I hope, President Biden runs again, gets reelected, but heaven forbid we have a Republican president in 2024 for whatever weird stroke of, then Mitch McConnell in 2025, that's the danger zone, right? If we really, that's where women stand to lose a lot. Yeah. So we need to not only vote blue, but we need to have more women in the room. And even if they're red, more women Republicans, if they're are more likely to be able to reason with one another, because this issue affects women's bodies. We need to vote for women in Congress to negotiate this and to figure out a solution and hammer it out. It might not be something that we all agree is the perfect solution, but we have to instill these rights and enshrine them into law. And we need women at the table, not men making these decisions, or at least more than 27%, because right now we only have 27% of women in Congress.
Yeah. I also have a question for you that I actually, my sister texted me this the other day, and she was like, can you ask your next guest, when you talk about reproductive rights, why the hell are they doing this? What do they gain from stripping women's rights? Do you have any theories? I don't know if anyone's really cracked this code of I think there's some obvious just bigotry type answers that we can pull, but do you have any theories as to what does this do for the Republican Party? What does this do for men to kind of strip women's autonomy and power in this way?
What a profound question.
There you go, Sis. Shout out to my sister.
I think if anything, it's just mobilizing the base of the Republican Party, because they've really, the thing that they are really rallying around now, they've got the religious right that believes that legislating morality like this is the one thing that kind of holds them together. And there's a number of other issues, but I think this just really mobilizes their base to get out to vote. And look at what they, on the Supreme Court, the ideological shift by just the last few judges that were appointed during the Trump administration. It's just very politicized, which is...
Well, I hope it's also just them being so dumb, because 60-something% of the country are pro-choice,
right? Even majority of American Catholics.
Well, I also saw something that even in red states, it's the majority, there's a small majority, but it's majority are still pro-choice.
That it's just, it's been part of our culture, just a recognition that going backwards on this goes back to coat hangers in dark alleys where women will die. Yeah. And those are our daughters and our sisters. These are not and it's really going to be poor women. It's because wealthy women from time immemorial will get on a plane or go and pay for what they need to do. But it's such an equity issue and a liberty issue and an economic issue.
It's so crazy too to think that it's also so by location, because it's I've obviously every woman has probably felt the gut punch that we've been talking about all week, right? But it's when you think about your circumstances and being in California where they're about to I don't even know what it's called, put in the Constitution that to protect the right to choose, but even just by location, you can be, it's just everyone's situations are so different, by class, by race, by now just what state you're in, you know?
Yep. And it's so visceral because it's so targeted at women. And yet, again, we're talking 75% of Congress is going to be making this decision if we don't get more women at the table to legislate against women's bodies. We don't legislate against men's bodies in this way, and their reproductive freedom.
Maybe we should start.
That
No,
would
we
be
shouldn't. But you know,
The
an
vasectomy
interesting
argument.
social.
The vasectomy argument is so fair. I don't know if you've heard it, but
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I don't know. But to that point, I mean, our amazing VP did ask Kavanaugh during those good old hearings back in the day, like, can you name one piece of legislation legislating men's bodies? And he could not. So
I thought you were gonna say, can you name one female reproductive body part? I was gonna say no.
we all know that he could definitely
We
not
know,
name that either.
yeah, there's no shot. No shot.
Not a shot in hell. But we do want to get into our I have a stupid question segment. And that starts with the idea of codifying Roe v. Wade. That is something that has been discussion, whether that'll happen or not. We could go down that rabbit hole too. But before we even think about that, the word codify, what does that mean? When someone says we're going to codify something, can you explain what that means from a legal perspective?
yeah, sure. I mean, not that I'm an attorney, but it's getting it. It's like the legislation, the laws are created in Congress rather than letting the courts interpret them and determine what they really mean. And so if there can be clarity in the legislation that is passed by both houses of Congress, signed by the president, it's a different ball game. It's a different ball game rather than interpreting previous court cases that have risen up, as far as the Supreme Court, like Roe v. Wade in the 70s, or then Casey in the 90s, saying that, this is the law of the land. And then it just makes it final. And I'm really glad you asked that question, because that's what I try to say. And what's so funny is I've been talking about this issue since I launched our congressional campaign in December, that women's reproductive freedom has to be a top priority in Congress. And it's solvable. There's hope. It's not like the Supreme Court speaks and then it's over on this issue, because they've interpreted this issue, but we need to put it into law. And so we need to give women that hope, but we need to empower us and men that stand with us to vote for the right people to get that legislation done.
Absolutely.
Totally. It's looking back, just seeing so much of the coverage of this, it's like there have been so many opportunities over the years for these protections to be put in place. And
right.
It is really
wild. And why do you think that is? Because it hasn't been a priority.
Totally.
And why is it not a priority?
Because there aren't enough women in office. So
sorry to interrupt you, but yes, exactly.
Oh, no, you're good. I mean, it's a connect the dots puzzle. It's one of those simple, I'm terrible at math, but that's an equation I can absolutely do. So I don't know what math teacher I need to thank for that, but regardless.
Can you also just, as we start to wrap this conversation up, can you also kind of shed light on really just this midterm election and how it's going to play into this conversation, ultimately possibly this outcome of where women's right to choose really lands in this country moving forward, and kind of how voters really can get involved and why it's so important to tune in to this election specifically?
Absolutely. Because, in states that are safe blue seats, right, or congressional seats that are safe blue seats, we got to keep them blue, but it's really the action's going to happen in those swing states in Georgia, Ohio, Florida, Wisconsin. That's where people who care about this, and this is, like you said, the majority of Americans, this is a big issue, need to go to the polls. They need to vote. They need to wake up, and they need to make sure they vote for people that represent their views, because it's going to be critical in the next Congress starting next year to make this issue front and center. High stakes.
High stakes. High stakes.
Totally. Well, we can all now also pray that this gets people out, and hopefully people are inspired by this episode. People are also inspired by your campaign. Where can they find you? How do they get involved? How do they support? Give us the 411.
Thank you so much for that opportunity. So people can check out Emily Beach for Congress. Beach is just spelled like the ocean, BEACH. For Congress.com. I'm the only woman in this race. This will be a safe blue seat, and there's not a lot of daylight, I think. Obviously, both there's a Republican running, there's 3 Democrats running. One of the 3 Democrats is going to win. But again, this is an issue that directly affects women, women's bodies, women's choices, and women need to be at the table leading this fight. And quite frankly, as I said earlier, women like me who can help negotiate some kind of solution with the other side. are critical. With only 27% women in Congress, we need more of us. We don't need to lose representation when a wonderful champion like Congresswoman Jackie Speier retires. So I really hope people will mobilize and learn about me and learn about some of the other things I bring. We've talked a lot about choice, but there's a lot of other issues at stake. And I really feel like Congress is just dysfunctional right now. There's so much toxicity. There's so much gridlock that people that bring other tools in the toolbox, that have had broad life experiences, that have done hard things in their life. I have commanded a Patriot missile battery in Saudi Arabia. I've served in Korea. I've lived in every corner of this country working with teams in the Army all around the country and around the world. I've worked in the business world. I've run a nonprofit organization. I've parented teenagers through the pandemic. Man, it'll make Congress look like a cakewalk. Raised my babies, right? Navigated the public school system, navigated kids with learning differences and special needs. I've had a foster kid too. I understand the mental health challenges that are happening in this nation. We need women at the table to navigate solutions to these things. And I think people that bring broad life experience really bring something to the table. And I want to be part of the long-term solution in Congress. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with your listeners today. EmilyBeachForCongress.com. Need all the help I can get, even if you don't live in the district,
Yes.
There's ways you can help.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this just scary moment, honestly, in history that we're living through and walking us through it. So we appreciate you and your time, and good luck with everything. We'll be watching your campaign.
My honor to be running for the House of Representatives, and we're going to win this fight. That's why I'm rolling up my sleeves. We're going to work and we're going to get this done. So I don't want everybody to fear. We're going to elect the right people. We're going to get this done. And thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today.
Thank you.
Let's get into it. Well, we have quite the bill to talk about.
Yeah.
A bill. And we're not even talking about Destiny's Child bills. Like, this is some serious stuff. We're talking about one introduced in Louisiana that has everyone paying attention. One that, I don't know, maybe it tries to, put women in the frame of homicide for seeking abortion and so much more, because that's not just the one thing that's in the bill, as if that's not bad enough. But can you walk us through what's included and also why we obviously should be so concerned about this?
Yeah, I mean, this bill to me is just the logical end result of 30, 40 years of extreme, anti-choice and views on abortion. And what it comes down to is the argument over personhood, which is key to anti-choice extremists, which is from the moment of fertilization, a fertilized egg is a person. So that's where they get, the charges for murder and, issues with hormonal birth control and Plan B and emergency contraception. It all stems from that one basic point. And, the difference with those of us who are pro-choice is, to me, that is a religious view. If you believe that a soul attaches, at the moment of conception or a person or what, it's not a legal view, but that's where all this comes from. And how it leads to this craziness that abortion is homicide and that IVF would be illegal because you would have these fertilized embryos just sitting out there, might be destroyed. That's kind of where it all comes from, is the point of personhood. And they're very smart about it.
Totally. And so wild to me to even think that could be, I don't know, even relevant, because there's a little thing called like separation of church and state, but apparently we've forgotten that in this day and age, which is really quite concerning and wild. But in terms of this bill specifically, how did this come to the floor? How is this come to fruition specifically in Louisiana?
Yeah, so the lawmaker who pushed it he's from a little corner of the state, right where Louisiana meets Texas and Arkansas. It's extremely conservative and much different than the rest of Louisiana, and very different from New Orleans. And he is extremely religious and is conservative to a degree that it's more of a government intrusion generally, which is very interesting considering his religious views that lead to the ultimate intrusion. But he, he has a following online. He was very anti-vax. And by the way, he is a nice man in person for what that's worth.
How it goes, unfortunately.
He is, and not all of my colleagues are.
Yeah.
But he's very religious in a lot of ways and very strident on the issue. And he was working with these pastors and leaders. It's something I've only come to recognize in the last few years. They call themselves abolitionists, and they talk about equal protection for embryos or fertilized eggs. And they're pretty gruesome in a lot of the stuff they show and say. And, they're very much against rape and incest exceptions or any sort of exception whatsoever. And so apparently he worked with them on this legislation. And honestly, the timing of the hearing was totally by accident.
That's funny.
Yeah, I think the leadership and the chair of the committee had been trying to push it off as long as possible. And it happened to be scheduled right after the draft opinion was released. It's just completely fortuitous.
Really? So it was just kind of like ironic that it happened like that. Like it wasn't like, oh, this leak happened. Now we can move forward with this bill.
Yeah, they were, like I said, like the chair and leadership was trying to push it back as far as possible, I guess, to, maybe he would change his mind or maybe it would get too late in the process. Because the later you present a bill in committee, the less likely it's going to be able to go through the House and go through the Senate. And he got really kind of lucky with the timing. And
oh my gosh, that's wild.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, kind of pulling it back and getting into the specifics of what's really in this bill, can you give us the breakdown here of what it all includes?
Yeah, so the bill in its original form, like I said, defines a mule person as from the moment of fertilization. That's actually a little different and a little more extreme even than some of the extremists who say at implantation. As y'all know, being women, an egg is fertilized in your fallopian tube and it stays there for a few days and then it goes down to your uterus and then, depending, maybe 72 hours or so later, it implants on your uterine wall. And so the importance of that, and a lot of women actually don't understand all the details, but that's how an ectopic pregnancy happens in your fallopian tube, where you have a fertilized egg that will kill you if it's not removed. Also, emergency contraceptive and actually even a lot of hormonal contraception prevent a fertilized egg from implanting in your wall. So while it might be fertilized, it gets it out of you. And to them, that even is a step too far. That they start earlier. Yes. And so it defines, a person from the moment of fertilization. So going from there, everything is illegal. And it specifically provides that is a crime of homicide for both the woman who is pregnant and her doctor. And, most anti-abortion laws steer clear of criminalizing the mother because they know how unpopular that is and how bad it looks. And this just went for it. So that's kind of the crux of it. There are some other bizarre things, like says that the state of Louisiana does not have to listen to federal law on this issue. It says if a judge refuses to enforce it, they could be impeached. It's out there, and it was well thought out.
So, like, if you've taken Plan B, like, they would consider you a murderer.
Potential murder, because Plan B is within 72 hours you're supposed to take it, and it's possible that the egg was fertilized in those 72 hours, and so it would be outlawed because it's possible that you would be destroying a fertilized egg.
Well, Maddie and I will be in jail, so we better be roommates.
On hormonal birth control, you don't even know how many times your hormonal birth control, didn't allow implantation of fertilized egg, and you just had a regular period. Like totally. It happens without you knowing.
Yeah, 100%.
1,000%. It's just is the whole thing to me is just so crazy. I know it's like a classic talking point that's really been out there the last few weeks, but is especially just the fact of you're defining personhood at that particular stage, but then you're not providing any, help to the mother financially. There's no, child support doesn't start. So the whole thing to me is just really bonkers and bizarre. But we do want to talk about sort of the general temperature of the room there. What was that like? What are the other policymakers in the room feeling about this particular bill and others that will probably come to fruition as a result of this kind of starting the trend, if you will, unfortunately.
Yeah, so Democrats in the legislature who are far outnumbered are generally some level of pro-choice. There are a few, especially from rural areas, who identify publicly as pro-life, but even them all support different levels of exceptions, let's put it that way, and personally different levels. Republicans are all aligned to some degree of pro-life, and it's political for them. So for most of them, some are very religious, like I said, and true believers, but many of them is because it's political and, the state is conservative and there's a lot of money thrown around their elections. But even the majority of Republicans were horrified by this because, wow, it's scary. It's horrible. They were hearing from all kinds of their constituents. And, it's just embarrassing, I think, to a lot of them. But they needed to save face. And so they were trying to do everything they can to prevent a vote on this bill, even though they could have filled it in committee and they didn't. And so what they ended up doing was substituted, like they had an amendment that substituted all the text for this, to me, almost as horrible bill coming from a senator that's probably going to pass this year, which while it doesn't throw the woman in jail, it still throws the doctor in jail. It still provides no exceptions for rape or incest. It still defines an unborn person. I forget the language it uses, but like pretty early in the process. So it opens up IVF and birth control as well. But they, thought that was less bad because it doesn't throw women in jail. And so they all voted for that to save face is what happened.
Wow. So progressive of them.
So cowardly of them.
Right. Absolutely insane.
It's total control. You have no control of your body. You have no control of your future. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said this much more eloquently could be, but I think that's what it is, and it's religious based, it's theocracy based, it's patriarchal religion. It's a control measure, and it always has been. You look at during slavery. How enslaved Black women were used to breed and owned by people, and their children were owned, and that was control over the reproduction in a different manner. So that's my views on it.
Yeah. How are you holding up working these past? Yeah.
I am existentially exhausted.
Yeah.
Physically, emotionally, all of that. I just burst into tears at times.
Yeah.
And for every woman out there who's ever been told don't see them cry, ignore that. Cry when you need to.
Let it out.
It lets it out.
Totally.
It humanizes you. And that's a normal response to this kind of trauma.
Absolutely.
It's really hard. I work a lot. I have a ton of people supporting me. So that's good. But I don't really realize until I get home on Friday to New Orleans, how tough it's been.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Appreciate the question.
Of course.
That takes the whole toxic workplace, debate to a whole nother level.
Yeah, 100%.
It is. It's really hard. It's hard to get anything done there if you're a Democrat, or especially if you're from New Orleans. But someone's got to do it.
I think we talked about this a little bit last time you came on, but how many kind of pro-choice reps are there with you?
Very few. We have around 30, low 30s, Republicans, Democrats, and independents. I forget. There's probably about maybe 10 of us, maybe 12, who will say publicly, yes, I'm pro-choice to varying degrees. Wow. There's maybe only 5 or 6 or 7 who will say that unprompted. There are others who, if you ask them or how they vote, they'll vote that way. And then there's another 10 or 15 who are reasonable, and on certain bills, depending on what they do, you can talk to them. And that's actually a pretty normal response. People have their own views and districts and religious views, but it's not many. Yeah. And even on some sort of abortion related measures that to me were more legal or esoteric and not specifically about abortion, we were able to get votes in the 20s out of 105. So not much.
Okay, so and where are we? We haven't really fully touched on where we're at with this bill right now. And there's been some updates. What is it looking like? What's the future of it looking like?
So yesterday, the author brought it in its original terrible version to the House floor, and almost immediately another legislator who had voted for it in committee put or made a motion to put the amendment on. And the amendment essentially strips all the old bill, puts a new bill, like I said, that is to me like almost as bad. And the new bill, the new language, which is a current bill filed by a Black female Democrat, which complicates everything in my state. And so all Republicans, except for the author and one of his best buddies, voted for the substitute amendment. So the author of the bill did not like that it was watered down and essentially hijacked. And I guess he saw the writing on the wall. So he agreed to, I can't remember if he agreed to table it or return it to the calendar, which is essentially just pushing it off for now. And the thing is, though, it can be brought up and vote and amended at any time, but it would need 70 votes, not 53, a little bit higher threshold. And, leadership has tried to say, oh, it's never going to happen. He's never going to get the bills. But I am not convinced. Never will get the votes. I'm not convinced of that at all. Like, I think it's going to be hanging over our head until June 6th when we adjourn.
I could not agree more, unfortunately, especially with the way things seem to be headed.
Yes.
And a question that I definitely have is, do you feel like, especially since this leak, that the intensity and the extremism around this issue has escalated?
Yes. They smell blood in the water. I mean, they have for a while, and even people like me who are pretty well involved in repro issues for a year or two, I've when asked if I thought Roe would be overturned, I would say yes. They smell it, they see it. They've been working on this so long. They're almost there. And then all these so-called moderates and people who are like, I don't get involved in politics or whatever, are suddenly freaking out because they were hiding behind Roe, while also electing so many monsters and allowing the Supreme Court to get hijacked. And now they're like, oh shit, what did we do? And it's too late.
Where are we at? What's the temperature of constituents across the state? Is this something that, the constituents want, do you think? Where is everyone, or for the most part, what you know, stand?
No. I mean, I'm really privileged to represent a district in New Orleans where I'm free to be me, and they're almost 100% in support, but that's New Orleans and that's very different. And I'm really lucky. We've been all getting emails from around the state. There's a vocal, very small minority that supports HB 813 and everything it stands for, and abortion is murder. But it's really I think it's about 25% of the state, because there's been a couple of polls in the last few years that show that there's only about 24 to 27% of the state who thinks abortion should be illegal in all circumstances. Because when you start asking about rape and incest and the mother and that sort of thing, people start dropping off like flies. Right. Oh, that's okay. So I think across the state, most people, if you really explain that to them, they're not a fan of this, but they, vote for these people and these policies and outwardly support it.
Do you think it's this extreme of a bill is something that might wake up some voters in Louisiana to be like, okay, I'm not for this. We're not throwing women in jail over, birth control, emergency contraception, abortion. This is where I draw the line, and it's an election year. Do you think there'll be any type of movement around and just mobilization around no, this is too far?
I mean, that's where they draw the line now, but that might change.
Yeah.
I mean, they've drawn the line many places and they've all jumped over it. It has been interesting to see how IVF touches everyone, Black, white, rich, poor, especially wealthier, though. People who might identify, a lot of people I know who identify as Republican for sure. So it's science, technology, and they're calling themselves IVF fertility warriors, and they have come out strong because the clinics they go to alerted them. And of course, the clinics want to keep making money, but I think they do agree with the principle. And these people come out swinging. And I think that got the attention of a lot of legislators, many of whom have children by IUI and IVF. I know because they told me. So that's caused a lot of attention, but I'm just afraid that those people, once the worst of the worst is passed, they'll just go back to the way they were.
Totally. Because it's very easily that they could drop that an element or that wording from the bill and then go on their merry way, and everything else is still in play.
Yeah. But it doesn't affect them. So whatever.
Totally. Which maybe this seems like a silly question, but gotta be curious. Do you think there would ever be any room for sort of the reverse type of legislation, like maybe legislation on, I don't know, men's bodies? Look, here's to maybe, I don't even want to hope for that because I don't want that either. But what do you feel like is the, oh yeah, Maddie's like, excuse me, sign me up.
Vasectomy.
The amount of times I've said vasectomy in like literally the last week has been, I mean, too many to count. Let's just put it that way.
I mean, look, like if we're going to keep taking this further and further back, then, you know, you start looking at like biblical, you know, stories of, well, why are you having sex but for it to connect the baby, you know, connect and like have a baby? You're just, you know, wasting God's whatever. I've seen some of that in other states, but like it's just not going to happen. Men are in charge. I mean, my legislature is not 21 women now. It's 23 now. I think we're 22, which is low. Ridiculous. But, you know, men are just in charge everywhere. And I also don't see it happening because women are crazy generally. And why would I want to do that? That's kind of nuts. But, you know, it's fun to talk about. And I think it makes some men kind of faint, but they also, it doesn't apply to them. So they just, you know, wave it away.
Yeah. What are some just ways to, I guess, combat some of this, specifically in your state? Like we said, it's an election year. Do you have any suggestions or even, you know, kind of cries for help of like things that you want people to be aware of ways they can take action and help out with this issue and specifically this heinous bill?
I think it's important for not just when people are, so for on the Republican side, not just Republicans they're voting for, but ones they know elected and in office and whatnot, to push them that, look, like y'all have like taken this to an extreme and like you need to push back on some of this nonsense. And then for Democrats, you know, it's not enough, as we've seen nationally too, it's not enough to vote a certain way. You have to act a certain way. You have to say things. You have to educate people. Most of my job I consider in the legislature is introducing issues that they don't know anything about and at least educating them. And maybe 5 years from now, something will happen to give these people, you know, a voice, especially in like LGBT issues. And, you know, don't just vote for someone who's going to be silent and just vote a certain way. That doesn't help us when you're in the minority. You need people who are going to be active and vocal and engaged. And, you know, that's part of what we can do as Democrats as well.
Totally. And speaking of vocal, you are one of those people, and you are also running for state senate, looking, you know, take on another seat. Can you tell us about your campaign and what inspired this particular?
Yeah, well, it was sudden because so the legislature, we're all up for re-election next year. We have 4-year terms. But the woman, the amazing Karen Carter-Peterson, who she's my senator, my House district is in her Senate district. And she had to resign a few weeks ago. She had some personal addiction issues. And so she resigned very suddenly and we weren't expecting it. So that means a special election will be held because there's enough time left in the term. So they announced it for November. And, you know, I was mostly planning to run for her seat, but I hadn't officially quite decided. Like I wanted to see how the rest of this year played out.
Right.
And just, you know, just see what was going on with my life as well.
Yeah.
And so I said, I ran a poll and I'm the front runner, no question. But I still wanted to think about it. And I was going to wait until the end of June or after we were in session. And then the Roe decision dropped. And I was like, oh my God, what's going on here? And then a few days after that, this reporter in Louisiana wrote an article. So right now there's only 5 women senators out of 39. The one seat's open. And those 5, they're white, Black, Democrat, Republican, and they are all loudly and proudly anti-choice. And they talk about it. And this reporter wrote an article and said all of the women in the Louisiana Senate are like vehemently anti-choice. And I sat down and wrote a press release and announced my candidacy right there. I was like, at minimum, at the end of this week, once the state will know there's one person, just one, who cares? And so here we are.
So we were going to ask, like, what is the picture of the state senate look like? How does it compare? And so you're saying you would be the only pro-choice
I'd be the only
senator?
pro-choice female. There are, again, there are a handful of men, all black male elected senators, probably 6 or 7 who generally vote pro-choice. Generally, none of them are particularly vocal about it. A couple will talk to you if you ask them about it. They're just not very, and maybe that's because Karen, who retired, was the vocal one. I don't know. They're not very vocal about it. And recently, a strong anti-choice measure passed the Senate, and only 2 of them voted no, and 4 or 5 of them were absent. So while they might vote properly at times, they don't, to my knowledge, say much. So it's really kind of a no man's land for abortion and reproductive issues.
Well, it's just like wild and so honorable the work that you do, that you are just in there in the trenches, and with being the only one, I can't even imagine, truly.
Yeah.
So we need way more people like you, and it's just like it could be so easy for you to be like, this is too much, I need to quit, but you're not, and I think that's amazing. So
I mean,
props.
One day at my age, my boyfriend and I have started having quitting fantasies of moving to Colorado.
I know. I'm like,
and just like eating gummies and enjoying the weather and going skiing and stuff.
I mean, this is so hard for like women everywhere, but like in states like yours, I can't even imagine. And I'm like, come to California. I don't even know what to say at this point. It's just like these people.
And like I'm educated and professional, and I can leave if I want, but other people can't. So I will say, as long as my brain lets me stay.
It's a lot on your shoulders, but it's super honorable. So
1,000%.
Yeah, I don't even
keep on chugging along, and we're here to support. And speaking of which, want to let everyone know where people can find you, how to support the campaign, what are some of the dates they need to know. Can you walk us through that as well?
Yes. So very, very, very unfortunately, I cannot raise money while I'm in session, which is killing me.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God. I didn't even think about that. You're so
right. If any angels out there want to start a PAC, you're totally free to.
Wait.
Just throwing it out into the universe. I've been throwing it out into the universe lately. But starting, we Sine Die, which is end session by 6 p.m. on June 6th. So everyone who has signed up at my website, it's mandielandry.com, MandieLandry, and I'm easily findable on all social media and Google. My social media is Vote Landry, Landry. And you can sign up, not just to help with the campaign, but get a notification. You can donate, but we're starting to collect for volunteers now. When I ran, I didn't know anyone in politics. I wasn't connected, and I knocked doors for months and months with so many other people. And so we're going to do that again, because I think it's the right way to run, and also to just see how people are and see what they're doing, and see how they are post-COVID, because I couldn't see constituents for so long. So we're going to be doing that, and all help is welcome, phone calls, money, all of that. So.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So everyone mark your calendars for June 6th. We are pouring money into this campaign immediately.
Oh yeah.
But thank you so much for coming on again and talking about this. I know it can't be easy, and we just appreciate you. And if you need anything, let us know. Because
this is great. Send me. I want a pink microphone next time.
Oh, we are on it.
Amazon, we'll ship you.
Maybe I'll be back and update you. But just email me or text or whatever if you want to know what's going on. It's quiet for now. The bill is quiet for now, I guess I should say. But that may not last.
Right. Yeah, totally. All right. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
Hang in there.
All
right. Bye.
Bye.